Alright, so before we jump into this, let me ask you one simple question. How on earth do you top Super Metroid? If it took you about 8 years to answer that question, then you are on pace with Nintendo, my friend. Unfortunately, that wouldn't be the first time Metroid and Samus go on a long hiatus, but it was the first. So I'm gonna be frank with all of you now, I haven't always been a huge Metroid fan. In fact, if you had asked me about it at the time of the first game's release, I wouldn't have been able to answer. I wasn't born yet. But if you had asked me about Metroid 2, I still wouldn't have been able to answer. I was just barely getting the hang of sentences. And the same thing for Super Metroid. I was like 6 and just figuring out how to not lose my mind when going to school. In fact, I didn't even know Samus was a woman until Super Smash Bros. Came out on the N64. That was the first time I ever saw Samus, and it was only after a well-timed pause after getting shocked from Pikachu that I even found out about her secret. I couldn't be the only one. Right? I'm sure others out there did the exact same thing at some point, right? Right? Anyway, it wasn't until then that I became a fan of Samus. Now, say what you want about that, but it did make me curious about her and her games. It's what led me to getting Metroid Fusion for the Game Boy Advance and Metroid Prime for the GameCube when they both came out on the same day. On the same day. I cannot stress enough how good that was. Never mind for me being a fresh fan of the series at the time, but for all those other people out there who were just dying to get anything Metroid related, this was a feast. Now, we'll be getting to Metroid Prime proper at another time. The remaster just released not all that long ago, and oh man, what a surprise that was. But we're focusing on the 2D side-scrolling for now. So, Fusion. Let's talk about Fusion. So, for me, because I had no other real comparisons to make, this was a tough game to cut my teeth on. Unlike Super Metroid, which basically threw you into a world and said go with next to no guidance, Fusion is segmented and way more structured. It's important to know that around this time, gaming trends were starting to shift and be more, for lack of a better phrase here, hand-holdy, especially in the handheld area. Things had to be made differently for portable systems. I'm sure the development team would have loved to have tossed you into a space station and say, good luck as you search every room and possible area. But man, if your batteries were on the verge of dying and you didn't save recently, and or know where a save station was, you'd be stressing out the whole time looking for one. So things had to be different when your GBA was running low. There was no handy battery icon, there was no percentage up in the corner, you just had a small blinking light. That could be like either another 20 minutes if you were lucky and caught it just as it started blinking, or more likely, literal seconds if you were super absorbed in the game. Either way, you needed to know where you were going, what you were doing, and how best to get places. Every area was made with those thoughts in mind. It's why certain things are built and designed the way they are in Fusion. It was all to help the player pick up and play for small bursts and still feel as if they got a great gameplay experience out of that short time frame. In this area, Fusion delivers and delivers hard. Emphasis on hard, but we'll get back to that in a bit. In fact, we'll talk more about the whys and the hows a bit later on, so, stick around for that. For now, my name is Leon, and I want to welcome you all back to the Metroid Retrospective. Looking into this game, you would never guess who developed it. Oh, hold on. Did you say Nintendo's R&D 1? With Sakamoto at the helm? Oh, you all are getting to be near subject matter experts, huh? Well, you would be correct. The team buckled down and pumped this game out on the 17th of November in 2002. It was shown off back in 2001 and had a radically different art style. Not much surfaced about that particular version of the game, but there is this picture here, and that's about it. While Super Metroid had small vignettes that you just kinda happened across every now and again, Fusion has full-on animated cutscenes and some close-ups on characters complete with dialogue. It helps get the player more invested in Samus as a character. She is still mostly silent in the game, and these inner thoughts only serve to get the player in her mindset, but it gave the elevators more of a purpose outside of getting from, place to place. Sakamoto wanted to make an all-new story for Samus and not really remake any one prior game, although it wouldn't stay like that for long. I mean, just take a look at Zero Mission. That aside, however, they wanted to make a new feeling Metroid, and in doing that, they didn't want to use any other games as a reference, and instead built Fusion off of the Wario Land 4 engine they just got done with. If you use certain cheat software, you can still find placeholder sprites and whatnot from the early development of the game, which is kinda rad. Some other development notes here. The game was composed by, oh my god, I hope I say these right, Minako Hamano and Akira Fujiwara, and they wanted to strike a tone that was more atmospheric rather than melodic. I think they managed to do that pretty well. Oh, and there was supposed to be some voice acting, but they couldn't do that due to the storage capacities of the cartridges, so instead we got little snippets for the emergency notifications throughout the game. As you can tell, much like any game, a lot went into it. These are just some of the easy-to-search factoids. I'm sure if you wanted to, you could look up a ton more, but we gotta move on. Got a whole game to look at. What is going on in this game? Well, set sometime after Super Metroid, Samus gets contracted to go back to planet SR-388. That's the planet from Metroid 2, in case you were wondering, with a team of Federation scientists to check in on the flora and fauna. In the opening minutes of the game, we see Samus shoot and take down a hopper, or whatever these little frog things are. No big deal, except it turns into this weird jelly-like thing and it flies directly into Samus. At first, nothing seems to be wrong. In fact, she completes the mission and is en route back with the scientists when she blacks out and crashes her ship into a nearby asteroid field. Her ejection system ends up saving her from the crash, and the Federation ship she was with takes her on board immediately. They quickly start to try and figure out what's going on with her, and they find out that the weird jelly goo-like creature is a parasite. They name it X. These still images here show a bunch of goo leaking from Samus' suit and presumably her actual body, which, kind of gross. In a panic, the doctors start to surgically remove sections of her power suit, and they find out quickly this does nothing. At some point during all this chaos, one guy just whips out a vial of Metroid DNA left over from the baby from Super Metroid. They somehow managed to make an injectable serum out of that and give this vaccine to Samus. Immediately, this clears her of the X and she stabilizes. Her suit and body are now changed forever by this ordeal. Her body holds human, Chozo, and now Metroid DNA. Not entirely sure how that works. You can't just take a vial of, say, bear DNA and inject that and suddenly become part man, part bear. Man, bear, pig. No, but seriously, it's a weird idea that they run with, but, it's a game, so I'm gonna let it slide. They got intergalactic travel and all types of aliens. I'm sure they have the means to make something like that work. It's a really weird idea. At any rate, Samus makes a full and very rapid recovery. No sooner had she stepped off that medical table, immediately she gets contracted again by the Federation to go check out the space station that hangs over SR-388. Some strange things went down there after they sent their findings from the planet's surface, as well as some of Samus's power suit, to be studied. If it were X-related, then Samus is the only person in the known universe that can handle it, and if it's not X-related, then they just shipped out one of the best bounty hunters in the galaxy to sort it out. It's a win-win for them. Armed with a new look and a new ship to match, Samus sets foot onto the station and starts to figure out the problem. Turns out it was the X, and they made quick work of the whole station. But how did they break free? And why does Samus have a nameless fear in her heart? This seems like a pretty good place to talk about the gameplay changes. So, in terms of controls, Samus feels a little more grounded. She feels heavy and more firm overall, which is funny to think about because they cut large parts of her power suit out. If anything, she should feel lighter and have a little more flow, but, what are you gonna do? One new feature is that Samus can wall hang. At certain points, you can find these handholds in the wall, and Samus can just grip them. You can also do this on ledges, really anything that has a 90-degree angle to it. You can grab onto it and pull yourself up. It's probably one of the best inclusions they could have added. It makes controlling Samus feel that much better overall, and you can even morph ball from a ledge hang if you pull yourself up into like a little morph ball hole. They adjusted how the wall jump works in this one as well. You can't just jump from one wall and then double back to it to jump off of it again like in Super. Once you make that leap from the wall, you have a strong burst of forward momentum that you can't really recover from fast enough to do the endless wall jumps. Oh, and you can't really morph ball bomb jump endlessly either. They took that away as well. My guess is because of how they had to structure the game overall. It's not the worst thing ever, but it does kind of take away from the exploration a little bit. Much like the last game, beams once again stack. And honestly, this game might have been the one instance of having the most OP beam weapons in any Metroid game. The beams in Super and earlier were still pretty good, but missiles are what everybody uses to just plow through everything. Fusion feels more like it's about the beam cannon in comparison, and, personally, I like that, especially since the beam weapon gets to be fairly sick looking by the end game. While we're on the topic of weaponry, missiles are on a toggle now. You don't have to cycle through all the gear, select them, use them, cycle out. It's just hold down the button, fire off whatever you need to fire off, let go of the button, and you're right back to the beam cannon. It is perfect. Because this game was on the Game Boy Advance, there is in fact another shoulder button. If you do press that one, you get to shoot at an angle. It's 45 degree up and 45 degree down. It's a nice little addition. But the 45 degree down angle can be a little tricky to utilize at times. The game has a tendency to overwrite inputs and either make it so you crouch and aim, or if you're trying to use missiles, it just outright cancels the 45 degree angle both up and down. I couldn't tell you why that is, but if you aim up or down at an angle and fire off a few missiles, then you're doing that manually. Kind of a bummer, but it's whatever. Just another way the beams take precedence over everything else in terms of combat here. New to this game, and much like beams do, missiles also stack. At a few points over the course of the game, you get a few upgrades to your missiles. Instead of being just another item to shift through, though, super missiles just become your default after you get that upgrade. It's kind of crazy, because in Super, you had a fairly small amount of super missiles to use. I think it caps out at around 50, give or take. In Fusion, you get up to 250, and they do pretty decent damage. But that's not where they stop. Because of story reasons, Samus isn't really able to use the ice beam, but you can use ice missiles, and even later you get the diffusion missiles. These, when fired, can freeze an enemy solid, or you can do a charge shot with the missiles and do a diffusion AoE freeze. It's super handy when it comes to getting through certain puzzles and finding specific blocks to break. The one downside to this, though, is that the super missiles lose the huge damage. Some creatures that took one missile to kill now take at least two. One to freeze, and then one to finish them off. Not really a huge deal, as if you even find half of the missile tanks in this game, you'll have well over 100 missiles to do whatever you want with. But it does make you use the beam weapons more on most every enemy, as a simple charge beam clears out most foes. Power bombs use the same shoulder button activation as the missiles do, which makes it much easier to use and overall is a pretty great quality of life upgrade for the player. It keeps you from having to cycle through everything. Along the same lines, there's no longer a run button. This is fine, as the Game Boy Advance is a much smaller screen, and, in an effort to make it so Samus stays relatively centered to the player, she almost never crosses the halfway point of the screen at any time. So because of this, when you get a speed boost, Samus just kind of bolts after a somewhat short run cycle. This has its benefits and its downsides. Benefits are you don't really need to think about when to activate the run. It just kind of happens if you run long enough on a good stretch of ground. But conversely, you can't pick up speed like you could in Super Metroid with some clever controller manipulations. Along with that, shine sparking has been simplified as well. It's easier to do and no longer drains Samus of her health. But you can't really do any, weird angles like you could in Super. In fact, you can't really break the game at all using the speed boost or shine spark. There's one instance in the whole game where you can sequence break if you use the shine spark. It's not easy to do, and you gotta keep the spark running through a good chunk of that section, but if you manage to do it, you get a fun little Easter egg for your trouble. Or you can just do this and get the secret message. I totally did it legit and definitely didn't do this at all. No sir, not me. One of the biggest changes to the Metroid formula is the addition of... Hey, do you hear something? It almost sounds like footsteps. One of the main driving factors of this game, both narrative and gameplay-wise, is that it keeps Samus on her back foot basically the whole time. The game opens up on her almost dying and forcing her into a situation in which she is constantly underprepared and weak. The first boss you fight, even the computer is like, I don't know, Samus, he ain't looking too good right now. You probably got, maybe a 10% chance, 90% chance of you getting bodied. Doubt you'll be able to survive much of anything here. And that's after giving her the power to absorb the X. It stays that way throughout most of the game. One of the small details that I really like about this game is Samus's stance. In the other games, like in Super, she stands pretty much straight up with her hand over her arm cannon. Why over the arm cannon? Well, it's a fictional power suit, but my guess is because the beam cannon produces such a large amount of kickback that Samus wants to try and control it while maintaining a strong vertical appearance. By placing her arm over the cannon, she can fire it and keep her arm level for the next shot. But why does that matter? Well, dear viewer, you see, in Fusion, she has a much different stance. She is no longer standing straight up, she's hunched over, almost in a defensive position. More interestingly, her arm is now under the cannon instead of being over it. So now you might be wondering, well, what does this change? In technical terms, nothing. She's still able to control the cannon fairly well, and the kickback from it is practically non-existent. But the theme of the game, Samus being on the back foot, she's weak, on edge, she takes up a defensive posture when fighting, and everything hits like a truck. On your second trip through the Sector 2, the tropical sector, those bee-like enemies, those things hit hard. They each take off about 2 to 3 whole energy tanks worth of life, and it doesn't get much better after you get those suit upgrades. Things hurt, and those aren't even the worst enemies you can find. Right after you make your way down that main elevator to access the different sectors, you get this small cutscene here. This is terrifying. Even now, the idea of this is insane to me. That there is what you come to learn as the SAX. It makes sense that this would be on the station, right? I mean, the X infects and copy its prey, and the Federation remove parts of Samus's infected power suit to try and save her. So, yeah, of course that would happen. But I mean, look at it. No, really, look at it. It stands straight up. It has its arm over its arm cannon. Not only is this Samus, it's you. It's a fully powered up, from the end of Super Metroid, you. It is the ultimate killing machine. It tears its way through the station with no care for its surroundings, no care for anything. It is hunting. Is it hunting for you? Maybe, but you can't really take the chance of finding out. Over the course of the whole game, you encounter the SAX, always preceded by this tense, heartbeat-like song, and with heavy footsteps. You hear it wander back and forth. Sometimes you have to get uncomfortably close to it to progress. This is something I think the game does really well. It turns the classic structure of Metroid games on its head a little bit. It turns from an atmospheric science fiction adventure into an almost survival horror-like game, but, with space horror. So, extra fun. Going back to it now, yeah, you know when the SAX is going to show up, and if you're a pretty good player, you can clown all over it. But as a kid, nope, forget it. Every time I heard, I knew it was about to go down. I was scared, man. Had me on the edge of my seat like I was watching The Thing or Alien. Fun fact, I'm sure most of you already kind of know, but Metroid, heavily influenced by the Alien movies, as well as a lot of other space horror films. Why do you think Ridley is named Ridley anyways? Was this the thing that Samus is worried about? She said there was a nameless fear in her heart, and as a player, we assume it was just because of her powered down state. I mean, hell, I'd be scared and have fear in my heart if I were her, the sole human survivor on this station. But to add the context that there was a version of me at full power running around, having my strength, knowing all my battle tactics, being able to predict and know all of my moves, GG's, man. It's time to hang up the gloves. Add to that the fact that the SAX can use the ice beam, and now, as Samus has Metroid DNA, she's extremely vulnerable to the cold. So if you get shot at all by the SAX, it rips a ton of health away. And if you get so unlucky to get hit with the screw attack, it's over. You know exactly how strong that thing is. Forced onto the back foot the whole time. This is as much a horror experience as any Resident Evil or Silent Hill. I mean, it's different for sure, but it definitely hangs with them. Now the question is, why? Why did Metroid take this approach? Fusion is so different from the others. The tone, the game feel, basically everything. So, what's up? You see, the reason for all of that is because it's a portable game. Alright, segment over. Moving on. Alright, I did say we'd get into the game structure, so let's do that now. Like I said, it's a portable game, a handheld title for the Game Boy Advance, and I can hear you now. But Leon, Metroid 2 was also a handheld game, and it wasn't like this at all. And you are correct. It was much simpler. Think about the handheld device for a moment. Nowadays, you can do just about anything on a handheld. Make phone calls, send text, video calls, search the internet for whatever, and, certain limitations no longer exist. Back in 2002, and way back when Metroid 2 released, things were a lot different. The OG Game Boy was a very, very simple machine. So when making that game, they had to think of it in terms of being a simple machine. That's why the core gameplay was just to explore and kill the Metroids. It's why the enemy list was so small, and why you fought the same creatures in just about every area, constantly. It's also why they had save stations, and why each area felt fairly small. So, flash ahead to the 2000s, and we see an evolved form of that design element. The areas are still fairly small. Each section of the station has its own unique area, but in terms of map design, it's why everything feels somewhat familiar. There's always a nav room, a recharge, and a save station at the beginning of every area. It's why the first few rooms in each area have a very similar feel to them. You get off the elevator, you pass through those 3 beginning rooms, and then you get 6 different versions of the same intro rooms. These are here for a few reasons. One of them is, of course, because of the aesthetic design of the game. Every area needs to feel like it belongs on a space station, so every area needs to have a spot that is lab-esque. The other more interesting thing is, as a player, you will remember those opening areas of each sector because it feels and looks like what a space lab might be. This is important because it also tells you that there's a nav room if you forget where you're going and what you're doing, a recharge room if you need to heal and replenish your ammo, and a save spot should you need to find one for basically any reason. Why does any of that matter? Well, because it's a portable system. As a player, you need to know where a reliable spot is in case you need to save the game and or fill up on ammo or, whatever else you might need. That is why the beginning of each sector feels this way. It's also why the game changes its base mechanics from exploration to a more mission-based structure, and why everything else falls in line with that change. The game was built from the ground up to be played in bursts, chunks, Sure, you could absolutely power through the game and beat it in a single sitting, but think back to the original device it was on. A system that was powered by 2 AA batteries. The development team knew they couldn't make a huge free-form world like they did in Super. Imagine running through all of Norfair and then your batteries died. Or you put the game down for like 2 weeks because you decided you wanted to play Golden Sun for a bit instead. Then, when you're ready to come back to Metroid and you power that back up, you think to yourself, where am I? What was I doing? In Super, you had the benefit of playing on a system that was plugged right into the wall, so, barring any power outage, you could play for as long as you wanted, and if you did take a break to play something else, you could always take your time to regain your footing. Eventually, you would stumble your way back to the critical path of the game. Fusion didn't exactly get that leeway. Things had to be built with the idea that a person would play for like 20 minutes at a time, and armed with that knowledge, they tried to make unique zones that visually distinguish themselves from each other and could tell you just how deep you are into the game. A simple map check could tell you. You see up here? These door unlocks? That's a great quick way to inform you of your progress. But let's say you took a really long break. Just head back to a nav room and the computer can fill you in. But let's also say you decide to brute force it and try to figure it out on your own. Because each sector is its own little space, you can fairly quickly find the critical path and get through the sector and move on to the next objective. This also makes sense from a narrative standpoint. Because Samus is on the station due to a contract between her and the Federation, it would make sense that they would control the flow and pace of the game. You can't really sequence break and explore because the Federation is calling the shots. This is a narrative example of why Samus's power is different when compared to Super. It's why she can't wall jump infinitely and why she can't bomb jump either. It's why when you get the space jump, you're nearing the end of the game. At that point, you can almost go back to any sector and clean it out for upgrades. Almost. One criticism that I find all the time when looking online for anything Fusion related is something along the lines of, it's so dumb that Samus just downloads missiles. Or, something to that effect. And objectively, yeah, that does sound kind of dumb. I mean, I wish I could just download bombs, use them all the time if I could. What gets overlooked all the time, though, is what do you think all those missile upgrades and things are? So, in the original Metroid and all the way up to Super, you would just walk into these artifacts and gain new weapons and powers and whatnot, but honestly, what do you think those are? For sure, they're suit upgrades, but more importantly, what they are is data. Data that gets integrated into Samus's power suit to let it achieve a higher form of functionality. Essentially, they were downloads. The Chozo had these things laid out, ready for anyone they deemed worthy of its use. Looking back at Metroid and Super Metroid, why do you think the Morph Ball is in the same spot? It's because it's a download. To us, it looks like an item, right? Like you walk up, you grab the ball, you're good to go. But why does it look like that? Well, it tells us as a player that, hey, that item is important enough to grab. Why does it disappear? Well, obviously because we picked it up. But for the in-world representation, you picked up the Morph Ball. The Chozo system identifies that you have the Morph Ball as a part of your suit, and therefore that download is no longer necessary, so it disappears. That's why it shows back up in Super Metroid when we get to that same spot, because at that point, we no longer had the Morph Ball as part of our power suit, so it makes itself available to us again. With that being the case, why is it dumb to have missiles be a download? I called to attention at the very beginning that the Metroid vaccine wouldn't work the way it does based on how stuff works, currently. You can't inject yourself with another creature's base DNA and have that become a part of you. But, in the future, whenever this game takes place, that could very well be the case. So, it would then make sense that her suit has the ability to fire missiles by default, but she just needs a string of code from either the Chozo or whomever to unlock that functionality outright. Also, let's not forget that her suit is tied to herself in a physical, mental, and emotional way. Which could also be why she takes more damage in this game. Because physically she feels weaker, and her suit reacts to that mental signal? Oh my god, I think we figured it out. Or, it's just a game and the developers needed a way to pace out the upgrades. Nah, I like my idea better. All that said, does that make this Metroid a bad game? In my eyes, no, not at all. Is it different? Yeah, absolutely it is. Can different be good? Yep, sure can. The core idea of Metroid is still here. You still go from area to area and build Samus up, and then you can go back to those earlier areas and find even more things to do and collect. Does it suck that Samus isn't as versatile as she was in Super? Yeah. I mean, it'd be super cool to use the same old tricks to get in and find things out of order, but that would more than likely break the game, and, not in a fun way like in Super, but in a problematic way. I would have loved to just go into the station and explore at my own pace, but in doing that, you'd have to completely change the way the game works and flows. You'd have to make the SAX completely different, or just remove it altogether. Neither of which would have been very fun, I'm sure. So as it stands, it's just a very good, portable Metroid, one that would be the building block for future titles. This game's story is more or less fairly straightforward, though I will say it has a decent twist that I'm sure no one saw coming really back then. I'm going to be diving kind of deep into the happenings of the game, so if at any point you don't want to be spoiled for a 20-year-old game, well, jump ahead to the timecode below. I'll give you a sec to do that. Hey, while you're down there, maybe hit that sub button, Maybe take a sec to share the video around? I mean, I would appreciate it. If not, I get it, but hey, you're in this deep, you might as well, right? Alright, that's plenty long enough. For those of you that stuck around, here's a quick recap of the story. After making her way on board the station, Samus gets told to go check out the quarantine bay. It's where the samples from the planet's surface, as well as where parts of her suit went. When you get there, you see this little hopper creature again. Well, just, hopping around. You kill it and leave, but did you notice the damaged and exploded area? That's a little strange, huh? Eventually you hit a nav room and speak with the computer. It tells you to go check something else out near the observation deck. You go there and... oh, hey, it's this guy. You remember him, right? Here, look, from Metroid 2. This little guy here. That's neat. I'd like a little callback. Awesome. Anyway, once you take out the large core X that pops out of it, you get yourself a new ability. In fact, that's how you get a large chunk of your power-ups from here on out. After linking up with the computer again, you get tasked with checking out the research sectors of the space station. Each one is modeled after a different ecosystem on SR-388, the first of which is basically just the planet's surface. You get told that the X are changing the habitat and overall air quality, and you should probably put a stop to that pretty quick. Let's make your way down to that elevator. If you're like me, you took some time to check out as much of this intro area as you could. You may have even found this cold storage room. A smarter player maybe would have turned around after taking cold damage, but if you push in just a little bit, you get some foreshadowing. What is Ridley doing here? Can't stay too long in there though, so head down to Sector 1 and oh hey look, a GameCube! Neat. Huh. Now once you open up the security lock and take out the gunk on the climate controllers, you head back to the nav room. This kind of back and forth mission-based content repeats itself quite a bit. It kind of goes, go to a new area, explore for a little bit, find a new power and or upgrade, and, obliterate everything in your path. Sooner or later though, bigger things start happening. Like in Sector 6 Knock, you head there to upgrade your suit, only to find a few things kind of stand out there. The X are actively hunting you, and for some reason, they know you can't handle the cold. So, some giant X from the Arctic sector go into the nocturnal sector to literally freeze you to death from the inside out. Something seems off. You go to upgrade the suit only to find a core X beat you to it. Go into the next room, fight for that upgrade. Once you win, you get the worst looking suit in all of Metroid. Congrats on the puke green Varia suit. Yikes. The bosses in this game are pretty neat, actually. From the fast Ceres in the Aqua sector to a rogue security bot and the Nightmare, the enemy variety is all over the place. Speaking of Nightmare, you don't encounter that boss until almost the end of the whole game. You get a lot of buildup though. Tons and tons of scary buildup. About halfway-ish through the game, you get a jump scare of sorts, and not like the SAX. I mean, you're just kind of minding your own business in Sector 5, and then suddenly, whoa! What was that? It stays that way for a long time as well. In fact, you get no resolution to that until, like I said, near the end of the game. And when you do, it has destroyed the majority of the beginning area of Sector 5, and that forces you to find some alternate routes. That fight is something else for sure. Don't even get me started on the goop face under that mask. Nightmares for real, man. All throughout the game, Samus is on the defensive. Even when you get some pretty good gear, the computer urges you not to engage the SAX. I mean, it's not wrong, that thing could still probably rip you in half, even after getting some of the key upgrades, but it still seems odd that it's asking you to avoid it at all costs. In fact, the upgrades from the Federation have slowed to a crawl. The last few major upgrades you found were from beating bosses. I mean, they were able to get that Various suit upgrade to you quickly enough, so why didn't they send anything else after that? Hell, the computer straight up says they're working on a beam upgrade for you, and you managed to get a missile upgrade for some reason. No one mentioned that at all, though. Strange. At one point, the computer asks you to get back to the habitation deck on the main platform of the space station. Looks like maybe some survivors? You go there and check it out, only to find the animals from Super Metroid? How'd they get here? Looks like saving the animals is canon to the story. That's awesome. Guess who gets to go back to Sector 6? You do. That rogue security bot is tearing up the place. Once again, the computer tells you to be quick, in and out. Don't stick around longer than needed. Apparently, the SAX is actively hunting you. I mean, it kind of has been this whole time, right? So nothing new, really. As you dig into the nocturnal sector, looking for this robot, you find an area that is, well, highly suspect. But with no way in the station AI all but screaming intruder alert over the PA system, you'll have to come back.
Warning, no entry without authorization.
You don't really want the SAX to find you here. On your way out from that area, you find the security bot. Guess it heard the call for authorization. When you beat it, you get the wave beam. It can shoot through solid objects. Well, fancy that. Let's go back and check out that door. When you do make your way back to that door, you start to enter a strange station subsector. It's much smaller than all the others. And being that it's attached to Sector 6 and hidden away in the darkest part of the darkest sector, you get the feeling that it can't be good. And you're right, it's not. Looks like the Federation was trying to clone Metroids, and by the looks of it, they were very successful. Is this why the SAX was on the hunt? Being that it has your memories and combat ability, it could very easily take out every Metroid on the station. I mean, you already did that on the planet's surface. It knows what you know. No time, though, as the security system goes off and the SAX is here.
Fire alert. This sector will soon be locked down. 60 seconds to isolation lockdown.
Looks like it followed you. It does a ton of damage to the station as it panic fires at its mortal enemy. The Metroids manage to gang up on the SAX and kill it. No time to sit and watch, though. Gotta get out of there. The subsector falls off and explodes. All the Metroids, and even the SAX, gone. At least you don't have to worry about them anymore. Moving through a new part of Sector 1, you end up in an area that looks weirdly like Turian for some reason. As you make your way around that area, you find Ridley, back again and louder than ever. Seriously, good God, that screech is loud, like crazy loud. If you thought Ridley was mean before, wait until it's just an X in the shape of Ridley. All that raw power and anger with no limiter now. It is almost as dangerous as the SAX. Thankfully, there's only one of those. Once you take out Ridley and make your way back to the nav room, you find out that the Federation has ordered you to be locked away until a boarding party lands. They intend to use the X the same way they were trying to use the Metroids. The only problem is, the X don't care about intentions. Not that the Metroids did either, but the X can't really be contained. Not like the Metroids can anyway. It's at this point that you find out two very important bits of information. One, there are no less than 10 other SAX on the station. 1 was a problem. 10 is a massacre. And 2, the computer, turns out, is an upload of Samus's old CO from when she was a part of the Federation, Adam. That's correct. This game takes a bit of time to establish some of Samus's backstory. Part of that was her time spent in the Federation. I didn't touch on much of it here, mostly because it's part of a wall of text on screen a handful of times throughout the game, and, also I don't want to give everything away. You should dig in and play it, figure it out on your own. With all those revelations coming to light, Adam makes a fairly solid plan to not only destroy the space station, but also the planet below. By having the station crash into the planet and blow up at just the right time, it can essentially kill two very large X problems with one, space station. That metaphor kind of got away from me. Oh well. Once you get to the main navigation room, you face off against one of the remaining SAX. It's been a long time coming, and you can finally give it a taste of the genuine article. When you do manage to fight it, and the core X emerges, you see it has a beam. Hey, that's the ice beam. Maybe you'll be able to use it now? Maybe the Federation was wrong about it not meshing well with your new Metroid DNA? Well, it flies off before you have a chance to absorb it to find out. Oh well, no love lost. It's going to blow up at the rest of the station anyway.
Propulsion sequence activated. Destination, planet SR-388.
With the countdown timer running, you make it all the way back to your ship? Where is the ship? Also, why is there a Metroid shell here? Seemingly out of nowhere, an Omega Metroid jumps out and one-shots you down to 1 health. Kinda reminds you of Mother Brain a little bit, huh? Just when all hope looks lost, the SAX comes back in and also gets one shot. Not a whole lot of help there. But weirdly enough, it kinda hangs around. You can absorb it now. It's almost like it wants you to. With full health and a new ice beam, you can take out the Omega and make your escape. You come to find out that those animals you saved, well, looks like they returned the favor. They saved you this time around. That is Metroid Fusion. I definitely kind of glossed over a bunch of story stuff. And if you watched it all and are saying, but you gave away all the best parts, well, that's on you. I gave you an out. There's a time code. You could have skipped it. Could have skipped all the way to now. I'm joking, of course. It's a 20-year-old game anyway. Spoilers are long since past. So where does that put me, in my opinion, on Fusion? Well, no surprise, I think it's pretty great. Rough around the edges, for sure, but still a solid entry in the franchise. I feel like it gets more, I wouldn't call it hate, but more guff than other Metroid games. I mean, I get why. It's a fairly large departure from the other titles, but that's what makes it fun and interesting. Well, to me, anyway. Plus, it gives a little more context in the game about Samus and, who she is as a character. I like the introspective text crawls on the elevators. I enjoy getting to know what she is about outside of just being a space badass. Overall, I can't recommend this game enough. It's a decent place for newcomers to the series to try it out because of its more structured approach. But be warned, it is difficult. Like, really hard with how much everything hurts. Plus, as a fun aside, depending on when this video comes out, Metroid Fusion just got released for the Game Boy Advance section of the Nintendo Switch software library. So, you have no excuse not to play it if you have a Switch. Very easy to play there. And again, if you don't have the means for that, well, I mean, you could try to find an original copy for the Game Boy Advance, but good luck. It's hard to find and even more difficult to find in a good price range. Otherwise, you didn't hear this from me, but emulation is your friend. All in all, it's a fantastic game in its own right. Great gameplay, stellar sound design, killer music, and honestly just a fun ride altogether. Plus, this game finally settles on what Samus as a character looks like. Her appearance throughout most of the games up until now has been fairly, well, loose, let's say. But here they finally settled on design. A tall, strong woman with blonde hair and some killer style. Look at those end screens. In all honesty, if you wanted to start with this, you very well could. I, however, would recommend starting with the next game in the series. We're kind of taking a step back. We're going back to Zebes, and we're going to see through new eyes what would be Samus's Zero mission. See you then. Hey there everyone, welcome to the end card. I hope you enjoyed the video. Bit of a long one, huh? Well, thanks for sticking with it. If you're still here, tell me what your favorite suit design is. Personally, I like the blue and white dread suit, but you know, that's just me. While you're down there leaving that comment, hit that sub button and the like, maybe share it around. And I'll see you on the next Metroid retrospective. See you next mission.